Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca, and I am 34 years old. I'm here today to share a story about navigating betrayal, fighting for validation, and ultimately proving my worth in a place where I was constantly undermined. It's a story about a professional environment that felt, at times, more like a toxic family dynamic, where certain individuals seemed determined to keep me in a box of their own making. What happened next, after years of ridicule and disrespect, when I landed an $850 million win, was something I never could have fully anticipated. It changed everything, but not always in the ways you might expect. If you've ever felt dismissed or overlooked, if you've ever had to fight twice as hard to be taken seriously, or if you've ever felt the sting of professional family turning on you, please hit that like button. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps me feel connected to you all. And if you want to hear more stories about overcoming challenges and finding your voice, please subscribe to my channel. For years, I worked at a large, established company in the financial sector. It was the kind of place with long hallways, hushed tones in the executive suites, and a palpable sense of hierarchy. When I first joined in my late 20s, I was eager, full of ideas, and ready to prove myself. I'd worked hard to get there, earning my degrees, putting in the long hours at previous jobs, and networking strategically. I believed that talent and dedication would speak for themselves. And for a while they did. I was assigned to a team focused on strategic partnerships and mergers, a high-stakes area that involved complex negotiations and massive potential deals. It was challenging, exciting work, and I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The team was led by a man named Michael. Michael was in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair, a booming laugh that could fill a room, and a reputation as a shrewd dealmaker. He cultivated an atmosphere that was part old-school boys' club, part high-pressure sales floor. There were a few other senior members: James, quiet and analytical, and Robert, boisterous and often dismissive. I was one of the youngest and, for a time, the only woman on the core negotiation team. Initially, I tried to integrate, to become part of the team dynamic. I stayed late. I went to the optional after-work drinks. I offered my insights in meetings, perhaps a little too enthusiastically at first. The first signs of trouble were subtle. A comment about my age when I suggested a new approach, a rolled eye when I proposed a different angle, a joke about me needing training wheels on a complex financial model that I had, in fact, built myself. These were small things, easy to brush off individually, but they started to accumulate. It felt like I was constantly being tested, not on my abilities, but on my resilience to their casual undermining. Michael would often interrupt me in meetings, finishing my sentences or redirecting the conversation before I could fully articulate my point. James would quietly question my data in ways that felt designed to make me doubt myself rather than engage in genuine debate. Robert was the most overt, often making comments about my appearance or my perceived lack of experience in front of others. One particularly memorable instance occurred during a team meeting where we were brainstorming potential acquisition targets. I had spent weeks researching a specific niche market and had identified a company I believed was a perfect strategic fit, undervalued, innovative, and poised for significant growth. I presented my findings, detailing the market analysis, the financial projections, and the potential synergies. It was a comprehensive presentation, backed by solid data. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, Robert leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "Well, isn't that just adorable?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Our little Rebecca has found a pretty little company. Are you sure you didn't just pick them because they have nice branding?" The room chuckled. Michael offered a patronizing smile. "It's certainly a thought, Rebecca," he said, slowly, as if speaking to a child. "But perhaps we should stick to the targets in our usual wheelhouse, the ones we know." My carefully researched points were completely ignored. The potential for an $850 million deal, based on my analysis of market trends and financial health, was reduced to being pretty. It wasn't just that they disagreed with my idea. It was the way they dismissed it, framing it through a lens of my perceived inadequacy and superficiality. This wasn't just professional disagreement. It felt personal. It was a constant chipping away at my confidence, a deliberate attempt to make me feel small and insignificant. The dynamic felt eerily similar to toxic family situations I'd heard about, where one or more members form an unspoken alliance to marginalize another, using ridicule and dismissal as their weapons. In the office, Michael, James, and Robert formed this unholy trinity. They had their inside jokes, their shared history, their established way of doing things, and anyone who didn't fit that mold, anyone who dared to challenge the status quo or bring a fresh perspective, was met with resistance and ridicule. My ideas were often attributed to others later, or presented by them after they had initially dismissed them when I proposed them. The emotional toll was significant. I started to dread going into the office. My stomach would clench on Sunday nights. I found myself second-guessing everything I said, rehearsing conversations in my head, trying to anticipate their negative reactions. I became more guarded, less willing to share my unfiltered thoughts, which, ironically, probably made me seem less engaged or capable to those who weren't actively trying to undermine me. I felt isolated. There were colleagues who were kind, but none who were in a position or had the willingness to challenge the established dynamic led by Michael and supported by James and Robert. I remember confiding in a mentor outside the company, an older woman who had navigated similar corporate waters. I described the constant low-level harassment, the dismissive comments, the feeling of being invisible despite putting in Herculean effort. She listened patiently and then offered a piece of advice that stuck with me. "They're not doing this because you're not good enough, Rebecca. They're doing it because they see your potential, and it threatens them." Their ridicule is a twisted form of respect. It was a hard truth to swallow, but it shifted my perspective slightly. It wasn't just about me. It was about their own insecurities and their fear of change. Despite the draining environment, I refused to let them break me. The ambition that had brought me there was still flickering, albeit a little dimmed. I started setting boundaries, subtly at first. I stopped attending the optional social events where the worst of the boys' club behavior occurred. I learned to present my ideas with more conviction, anticipating the potential pushback and having ready answers. I documented everything: emails, meeting minutes, my contributions, their reactions. Not because I planned to file a formal complaint, the culture didn't feel like it would support that, but because having the facts grounded me and gave me a sense of control in a situation that felt increasingly out of control. The $850 million opportunity arose unexpectedly. A major competitor was looking to divest a non-core asset. It was a complex deal, involving multiple international subsidiaries, regulatory hurdles, and significant financial engineering. Our company had considered it, but had initially passed, deeming it too complicated and too risky. But I saw something different. I saw the underlying value, the potential for synergies with our existing operations, and a path through the complexity that others had missed. I couldn't just propose it in a team meeting and expect it to be taken seriously. I knew I had to build my case outside the usual channels. I started working on it in my spare time, late at night, and on weekends. I built detailed financial models, conducted extensive due diligence, and researched the regulatory landscape in multiple countries. It was an immense undertaking, requiring hundreds of hours of work. I felt like I was working on a secret project, one that held the key to my professional future, but also felt incredibly vulnerable. What if I poured all this effort in, and it still went nowhere? What if they just laughed it off again? When I finally felt the proposal was robust enough, I decided to take a calculated risk. Instead of presenting it to my immediate team and Michael, I leveraged a contact I had in corporate strategy, a woman named Sarah, who had always been supportive and saw potential in me. I asked for 15 minutes of her time, ostensibly to get her feedback on some market trends. Once in her office, I quickly pivoted, explaining that I had been working on something significant and needed her objective opinion. I presented her with a condensed version of my findings on the divestiture. Sarah listened intently, asking sharp, insightful questions. She didn't dismiss me. She engaged with the material. By the end of the 15 minutes, her eyes were wide. "Rebecca," she said, "this is compelling. Really compelling. Are you saying you think we should revisit this?" That meeting was the turning point. Sarah agreed to help me elevate the proposal, but she warned me that it would still face significant resistance, especially from Michael's team, who had already dismissed it. We strategized how to present it to senior leadership, bypassing some of the usual gatekeepers. We knew we needed executive sponsorship, and Sarah helped me get a meeting with one of the executive vice presidents, a formidable woman known for her no-nonsense approach. Presenting to the EVP was terrifying. This wasn't just my team, this was someone who could make or break careers. I walked into the polished conference room, my heart pounding, carrying a sleek presentation deck that represented months of solitary work. I could feel the weight of expectation, but also the crushing pressure of knowing that if this failed, the ridicule from Michael, James, and Robert would intensify tenfold. I took a deep breath and began. I spoke with a clarity and confidence I hadn't felt in years. I presented the data, the financial models, the strategic rationale, addressing the complexities and risks head-on. I answered the EVP's probing questions directly and thoughtfully. I wasn't the timid, easily flustered person I sometimes became under Michael's gaze. I was a professional who knew her material inside and out. The EVP was impressed. She didn't make a decision on the spot, but she tasked a small, independent team with reviewing my proposal and validating my findings. This was a huge step. It meant my work was being taken seriously by someone outside the toxic bubble of my immediate team. When Michael found out that the divestiture opportunity was being revisited based on new analysis that originated from someone in his department, he was furious. He called me into his office, his face red. "What do you think you're doing, Rebecca?" he demanded, his voice low and angry. "Going behind my back. We already looked at that deal. It's dead in the water." "Michael," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, "I found a different angle, a way to mitigate the risks the team initially identified. I believed it was worth revisiting." "You believed?" he scoffed. "Since when are you making those kinds of calls? You should have brought this to me first. This is out of line." This was the moment I had to hold my ground. For years, I had internalized his authority, his dismissiveness. But now, I had the backing of corporate strategy and the attention of an EVP. "With all due respect, Michael," I said, my voice gaining strength, "I spent significant time on this. I followed the correct channels to get it reviewed at a higher level. My findings have been deemed worthy of further investigation. I followed protocol. I didn't mention the hundreds of hours of personal time I'd invested. He didn't need to know that. I just focused on the process and the validation my work had received." He glared at me, clearly unused to this level of directness from me. James and Robert, who had been hovering nearby, looked equally surprised. It was a small victory, a tiny boundary set, but it felt enormous at the time. The independent review team worked quickly. They validated my financial models and agreed with my strategic assessment. The EVP was convinced. Suddenly, the dead-in-the-water deal was very much alive, and I was instrumental in bringing it back. The next few months were a whirlwind. I was officially assigned to the deal team, reporting directly to the EVP, effectively bypassing Michael's authority on this specific project. Michael, James, and Robert were forced to be involved, but their roles were marginal compared to mine. I was coordinating due diligence, leading calls with potential financing partners, and working closely with legal and regulatory teams. The tables had turned. I was no longer the junior member whose ideas were ridiculed. I was the one driving the process, the one with the deep knowledge of the opportunity. The dynamic in team meetings shifted dramatically. When I spoke, people listened. When I presented data, it was accepted and discussed, not questioned or dismissed with a scoff. Michael was forced to acknowledge my contributions, albeit grudgingly. James was quieter, his analytical skills now directed towards supporting my findings rather than undermining them. Robert's dismissive jokes vanished entirely when he was in my presence regarding the deal. The power balance had shifted, and it was uncomfortable for them. The negotiation process was intense, stretching over several months. There were countless late nights, challenging roadblocks, and moments where the deal seemed on the verge of collapse. But I was driven. not just by the potential financial success, but by the burning desire to prove them wrong, to validate all those years of feeling dismissed and undervalued. It was an emotional engine, fueled by every rolled eye, every condescending comment, every instance of my ideas being ignored. Finally, after months of relentless work, the deal closed. It was a complex transaction, valued at $850 million. It was the largest acquisition our company had made in years, a significant strategic move that was expected to generate substantial revenue and market share. The news hit the internal wires, then the financial press. Suddenly, my name was associated with a massive success. The day the deal closed was surreal. There were congratulations from colleagues I barely knew, emails from senior executives, and a sense of buzzing excitement throughout the office. In the midst of it all, I had to attend a mandatory team meeting with Michael, James, and Robert. I walked into the room, and the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Michael started the meeting by giving a brief update on other projects, avoiding eye contact with me. Then he cleared his throat. "All right, team," he said, his voice strained. "As you know, the divestiture deal closed today." He paused. "Rebecca was instrumental in bringing this opportunity to our attention and leading the execution." He still couldn't quite bring himself to look at me or say anything genuinely congratulatory. James mumbled something that sounded like, "Good job," looking down at his notes. Robert said nothing, just stared straight ahead with a blank expression. The ridicule hadn't transformed into heartfelt respect, not instantly. It had transformed into silence, into a forced acknowledgement of my success that they couldn't ignore or dismiss any longer. Later that day, the EVP who had sponsored the deal stopped by my desk. "Rebecca," she said, smiling genuinely. "Incredible work. You saw something no one else did, and you had the tenacity to see it through. This deal is a game changer for us." She spent several minutes talking about the impact of the acquisition and how impressed she was with my capabilities. That conversation, that sincere recognition from a senior leader who hadn't been part of the toxic dynamic, meant more to me than any forced acknowledgement from my immediate team. Over the next few weeks, things shifted noticeably. Michael, James, and Robert were no longer openly dismissive. They couldn't be. I had too much visibility, too much proven success. When I spoke in meetings, they listened, even if they didn't always agree. The power had shifted. My professional standing was no longer solely determined by their opinion of me. It was determined by the $850 million I had brought into the company. Did the toxic dynamic disappear entirely? No. Old habits die hard. There were still moments of passive aggression, subtle attempts to sideline me on other projects, but they no longer had the same power. Their ridicule had lost its sting because I had irrefutably proven them wrong. The victory wasn't just the deal, it was reclaiming my professional identity from their negative projections. The experience fundamentally changed me. It taught me the importance of trusting my own instincts, even when others are telling me I'm wrong. It taught me to set boundaries and to recognize that not everyone in a professional environment will have your best interests at heart. It highlighted how much emotional energy I had been expending simply trying to survive in that toxic environment, energy that I could now redirect towards more productive and fulfilling pursuits. I realized that while the external validation of the $850 million win was powerful and necessary in that context, the real victory was internal. It was proving to myself that I was capable, that I had valuable ideas, and that I deserved to be treated with respect. It was about finding my voice and using it, even when it was terrifying. The boardroom ridicule had turned to respect, yes, but more importantly, my self-doubt had turned into self-assurance. I stayed at the company for a while longer, using my newfound standing to advocate for more inclusive practices and to mentor younger employees who might be facing similar challenges. I found ways to work effectively, minimizing my exposure to the most toxic individuals while maximizing my impact on projects that mattered. Eventually, I decided to move on to a new opportunity, one where the culture was a better fit and where my contributions were valued from day one. The experience of the $850 million win wasn't just a career highlight, It was a catalyst for personal growth and a stepping stone to a healthier professional future. I learned that true respect isn't given, it's earned, not just from others, but from yourself. And sometimes, the most powerful way to silence the critics is through undeniable success fueled by your own resilience. Thank you for listening to my story. It's a painful one to recount at times, bringing back a lot of difficult emotions, but it's also a story of hope and overcoming. If you've navigated similar challenges, whether in your career or elsewhere, please share your experience in the comments below. Your stories help others feel less alone. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about resilience, boundaries, and personal growth. Remember, your voice matters and your worth is not determined by anyone else's opinion of you. Keep fighting for what you believe in.